Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing a patch rundown on patch 12.8. Haven't done a patch rundown before, mainly because so many people already do them, but I felt like there was so much stuff in here about mid lane that I kind of had to cover it. Again, if you guys enjoy this stuff, make sure to let me know in the comments so I know to do more of them. First off, we have Swain. The Swain changes look pretty promising to me, so let's read through them. The first thing, healing from soul fragments. This is just like the little bit of sustain you get. This is just changed at later ranks. In my opinion, this doesn't really make a difference. I think maybe it gives you a bit of extra healing during team fights, but I think like your lane sustain kind of like remains completely unchanged. So I don't think this is a big deal, but it's possible like it impacts the team fights more. But yeah, I don't think it's the biggest deal. Maximum health increase per soul fragment from 5 to 12. This is pretty nice, but I think the reason they've done this, as we'll see later, is they've removed a lot of the max HP from Swain's ult. So I think this is kind of just like a compensation, and it doesn't... I think, yeah, it doesn't really like do much compared to before, mainly because when we get to that aura change, you'll see Swain did lose a bit of health. So I think overall, the passive is kind of just like a net neutral. There isn't too much to it. The only thing here is that Swain can't use his passive to pull out soul fragments anymore. That's just basically because you can't pull people anymore with your passive. So next thing is the Q. In my opinion, this is actually the biggest change, although a lot of people like may not see it that way. So the damage, I mean, the damage is like it's probably pretty much about the same. Like they've kind of tuned it so it's just like a little bit stronger early, mainly I think so that you can kill minions a bit easier. And it's got like a slightly reduced AP ratio, but I think it's mainly the same. The damage on additional bolt is again like base damage is up, but the AP ratio is down. I wonder if they're trying to incentivize building kind of like tankier items and stuff that's like you know, maybe the off tank items, stuff like Riftmaker and Demonic Embrace with changes like this. Maximum damage overall is again like higher base damage, it looks like, but significantly lower AP ratio. But this is what I think the biggest change is. So the cooldown from, what is this, 9 to 3 to 7 to 3, it makes a pretty big difference in my opinion. And I'm not even sure if Riot realized this when they did this, but when Swain was meta back in about 2018, I think, Swain would often be countered by the kind of like stronger laning mid laners. So you'd have champions like Orianna, champions like Syndra, champions with these very low cooldowns. And so like Syndra's Q is 4 seconds, for example. And so when you have a 9-second cooldown on your level 1, that basically means Syndra gets 2 Qs for every like 1 Q that you get. But if the cooldown is actually only 7, at rank 1, that means Syndra actually can only get 1 Q before like she has to match you for the second Q, right? So like if you and her Q at the same time, she gets like 1 additional one where yours is not on cooldown, and then you can like trade back again, as opposed to 2. So in my opinion, it actually makes like a pretty big difference in a higher level. As you guys kind of know, like punishing cooldowns is really important. And if you're a champion like Swain, where you're weak in the early game, you're mainly going to be looking to use your cooldown defensively. So the less time that you have like waiting for cooldowns, the less you're going to get punished. So I think this is a really like quite a big change. Obviously in like later in the lane it's not too big a deal, right, because it's just the same. But I think in those first like 5 levels, I think this makes a pretty big difference, especially levels 1 to 4. Like having a 6-second cooldown instead of 7.5, I think that's pretty big, especially in a lot of these like range matchups, which I think Swain does kind of struggle with. Mana cost down. I think it's nice, right? I don't think Swain's really a champion that struggles with mana, although this might incentivize, again, doing something like Riftmaker, because I think before, when the mana costs were a bit higher, you'd maybe have to rush like one of the mana items like Everfrost or Liandry, and it might be that Riftmaker now is a bit better. W, again, mana cost down. That's the only real change here. This is kind of nice. I feel like W really had no business costing so much mana, and I think it's kind of nice that the mana gets lower, because it means you can kind of use it as like a scouting tool, right? Like it gives vision. You can use it to like check enemy buffs and check enemy camps. So I actually like this. It'd be kind of nice if they made it cost like even a little bit less, but I think it's a good change overall. The Swain's E, you can recast it to pull all enemies rooted, and you get a soul fragment from each one of them. I think this is really nice because before, I think you could only pull 1 target, or you could only pull like targets if they're like stacked on top of each other or something like that. It's actually been a while since I played Swain, but anyway, being able to pull them all, I think is really big. The pulls themselves are the longer deal damage, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest. Grants vision. I think I'm actually I'm guessing they mean true vision, or is it just vision? I think they mean it's like true vision. Essentially, like if say you hit like an Akali with an E while she's in Shroud, I think it'll grant vision of her. Although I'm not totally sure. It's just because they've got like a true visionary here, but it's just vision of all rooted targets. So honestly, not sure. I feel like that could make a very big difference to like some of the matchups, because champions like Akali, you can normally like drain them in the Shroud, right? Like with your R. But if you could actually grant vision to them, so like even if you don't have your R, it allows you to kind of like trade on them a bit easier, and also for your teammates. So I'd be curious to see how this actually does. Lastly, the cooldown is lowered by 20% during your ults. I think this is like just you basically you're going to be able to spam it a bit more during your R, and I think that's pretty nice because Swain has a lot of trouble like actually staying on people like when he's ulting. A lot of the time in the past, like if Swain missed his initial E, you'd just be able to outrun him, and he'd kind of just be like standing there awkwardly while you kind of just like cut it out, especially if you have longer range. So I think it's like a pretty nice change, but obviously it's still going to be really important to hit that E. Now, down here at the R, we have like quite a few changes. So cooldown being lowered, I think that's very, very nice, especially for solo queue. In competitive, I think this wasn't a big deal because you wouldn't fight super often. But in solo queue, like there are fights that are way, way more often, right? And especially like 60 seconds at max rank as opposed to 120. That's crazy. I actually didn't realize it was so high at all ranks. But I think that's a really, really big deal. It's not an ult that you're going to use on cooldown all the time. Like, so it doesn't really matter like if it gets super low, but it definitely is. Like before it was so high that you'd be in a lot of fights where you just didn't have it up, right? So I think this is really nice. Drain damage per second is lower and the AP ratio is lower, but the drain heal is higher. So again, I think they're kind of like pushing him towards being the like fantasy of a drain tank or like a sustained DPS tank, and we'll kind of see how his item build sort of like ends up with that. No longer grants Swain bonus health and no longer doubles the health gain from self fragments while active. So in my opinion, this is the scariest change, because like while they did compensate him up here with a bit of extra max HP, I think this is a lot of HP lost. And like, yeah, I don't know, because it feels to me like Liandry's, for example, would be like the highest damage item, but this like forces you, I think, to going something like Everfrost or Riftmaker. I do wonder if like Swain might get to the point where he just like doesn't really do enough damage, and he doesn't really have the tools to force enemies to hit him. Like for example, if Swain like goes all the way to kind of like, he's like a really big drain tank, right? And but doesn't do that much meaningful damage, I think it might be that people just like ignore Swain, and then his healing doesn't really matter. And the only CC he has is his E, right? So a lot of these other kind of like drain tanks or champions that are very hard to kill also have a lot of CC, so they still kind of have to be killed. I think they do need to be a little careful about this, of like if Swain's damage ends up being too low, he might just get ignored in fights. But I think the one nice thing is that they have like made the spells like quite tunable. So like if there is a big problem with this, they can kind of just change the numbers. This is like another big change. They've made it so the ult duration basically, well, let's just read it. So it's based on demon power rather than 12 seconds. When you activate Demonic Ascension, you gain 50 demon power, decreases at a rate of 10 per second. So basically you got 5 seconds. And then after 5 seconds, it decreases quicker, basically, so you don't stay in it forever. But you gain 20 demon power per second while draining enemy champions. So this basically means if you can like stay near someone, you can stay in your ult forever. So yeah, I think this is quite interesting, because I think you might see some stuff like maybe Rylai's on Swain or something, where you can help like keep people like next to you, and then you can just like stay in your ult forever, kind of just like using them as a battery while you drain like health and demon power from them. I think that's quite cool design. So we'll definitely see how this kind of turns out. After 2 seconds, you can cast Demon Flare. This is basically just you can cast it once, like the explosion that you did before. So down here, the damage is up and the AP ratio is up, so that's nice. You're going to get a lot of AoE damage with that. Demon Flare now slows enemies by 60%, decaying over 1.5 seconds. This is very nice. Again, it's going to help you keep those people on like near you, so you can keep draining them. No longer deals additional damage based on health drain from enemies. So basically, it's like before, it used to store up a ton of health and then deal a bunch of damage with it. So my opinion on the Swain thing overall, I do think it's going to be better. I played a lot of Swain back in 2018, I think it was, when he was like quite OP and competitive. But I haven't really played him since then, and a big reason for that is just like he just like isn't good at a lot of the stuff that's important in solo queue. Like he does scale sort of well, which is like nice, but his skirmishing was very weak, mainly because of his ultimate cooldown, and also his laning phase was very weak. So he didn't have like that much going for him. I'm mainly curious to see what items end up being the best with him. I feel like something like Riftmaker, Demonic Embrace, and Rylai's could end up being the best. I'm definitely going to do like a full in-depth guide on Swain, and I'll be playing a lot of Swain today, trying to get maybe like a fully explained video out on him, or just like getting a feel for how he is in general. But yeah, I'd be quite hyped to see Swain come back. I think he's like pretty fun to play, but he's just kind of like, at least before, he wasn't there yet. But I'm hopeful based on the changes. So next is Bard. So we got the passive damage increased and we got the W maximum heal increased. In my opinion, this makes very little difference. I think Bard's kind of like problem at the moment is that in the current meta, scaling and like coming back is so strong. Like as Bard, like you're a champion that has to snowball the game, right? Because you don't scale as well as these other like say Enchanter supports. And you kind of become like less useful as the game goes on. But in the past, it's been very easy for Bard to do that. And actually, Bard was my most played champion on my main last season because I'd played like a ton of mid laners, right? And then I queued support second. And I'd just like always play Bard. And I had like a really good win rate on Bard last season. I had like 65%, something like that. And this season, I only have 44%. So in my opinion, Bard is like not the greatest at the moment, but I don't think Bard really needs buffs either. I think before Bard was like very, very overtuned in solo queue. He was like easy to play and also had a ton of impact on the game. He's very forgiving. So I think Bard now is just like a bit more fair. Doesn't really need buffs, but I think these buffs also don't really change the problem. Like at the moment, the kind of just like with how many comeback mechanics are in the game and also how strong scaling is at the moment, I think like before, let's say as Bard, like you generated your team like a 1k gold lead, that would be enough to kind of like, you know, you have a high chance to win that game. Just making up numbers, I don't know for sure what the lead would be, but now I'd say that lead has to be more like say 1.5k or 2k, because essentially you have to snowball the game harder to ensure a win, because there are so many ways to come back and the game in general is slower. So I don't think these really help Bard do that. I think like the W, I mean, it really doesn't do anything in my opinion. A little bit of extra damage is kind of nice. You know, maybe can help secure a few kills that you wouldn't get before, but overall, I really don't think it's what is holding Bard back. Ezreal R cooldown is lower at the second and third ranks. Kind of interesting. I think this is going to make it maybe to the point where Ezreal can use his ult twice in fights late game because like he gets the cooldown reduced, right? So he can maybe get it low enough to where he can use it more than once. That'd be kind of interesting. I think Ezreal's like pretty decent anyway, so kind of interesting buff. Don't have too much of an opinion of it. Fiddlesticks W healing against champions increased. I think this is very, very annoying. I think Fiddlesticks is really strong anyway in the jungle. I haven't played Fiddlesticks mid in a long time, so honestly no idea, but I think Fiddlesticks jungle is very, very underrated, so I'm kind of annoyed that this champion gets buffed, and we'll probably see it a lot more. There's some combos you can run, like Nocturne mid, Fiddlesticks jungle, to like guarantee the AoE fear. So yeah, I think that's a pretty annoying buff, and I hope I don't see that champion too much more. So Jhin. Jhin root duration is up. Damage against monsters no longer reduced by 25%. What is this? They want to make Jhin jungle a thing, is what they said. We can get Jhin jungle to a 44... Okay, whatever. Trap recharge rate. Okay, honestly, I don't think these changes really make a big difference. I'd say the only thing that maybe does is the W root duration at rank 1. I think that might mean that there are some supports that kind of couldn't close the gap in that sort of time, where they could follow up. So that maybe makes a little bit of a difference. Trap recharge rate, kind of think it's whatever. Like the Jhin jungle changes, I don't think Jhin can ever be a jungler, but maybe I'll be proved wrong. The Jinx base HP down. I think that's pretty good. Makes her a bit more punishable in the lane phase, and it's kind of just like an overall, you know, it's just like something that affects all aspects of the game. So I kind of like it. Been very annoying when Jinx just gets like, you know, somewhat a free lane and then just comes into a team fight, gets one reset, and becomes an AC 130. That's pretty annoying, but I'm kind of glad they touched that. Now next, these are the AP Kai'Sa nerfs. So it looks like, how does this go? So they've got, this is on consuming your full plasma stacks. Okay, so they've made it so it scales a bit harder in terms of targets missing HP, but they've just lowered the actual poke damage on it. They've lowered the AP ratio, and they've also made the shield a bit higher. So yeah, I think this is definitely kind of annoying for AP Kai'Sa. It makes it so that you're mainly going to be using your W kind of to, or it's going to be doing more damage when people are low, but it's not as good as an initial poking tool. I think it's kind of a healthy change, to be honest. I think in general, like poke champs being strong is pretty annoying for the game. Yeah, it's like very annoying to play against, especially if you're a champion without sustain, because I think a lot of the time these poke champions are tuned because there are many champions that just like have a lot of sustain. But you know, if then you're playing a champion that doesn't, you kind of get like hard done by in comparison. So I like the changes. I think this, I'm not sure if it'll kill AP Kai'Sa, but I feel like it might not be worth playing over other poke champions. One thing I've said before is that if you play, like generally there's like one viable poke champion just because they're so similar. So it might be, say, your poke champions might be like Corki, Ziggs, Lux, Kai'Sa, you know, whatever. And generally you just pick the one that's the best because they all kind of like fill the same role. That might kind of move Kai'Sa out of that like top tier and kind of like put one of the other ones in the limelight instead. Now, these are dangerous changes. So the Q shield AP ratio increase and the EAP ratio increase. Mainly, this Q is really ridiculous. So I actually remember, I think this was in Season 10, Kassadin got nerfed from 60 shield down to 40, and I think the shield actually didn't used to be as good as they're making it now. So I think this is a very dangerous change, and not really a change that I want to see, honestly. I think Kassadin already is a very good counter pick in solo queue, and yeah, they're like re-emphasizing his strength as the counter mage. I think this is kind of like, it's like a design philosophy. Personally, I really hate when I'm like counterpicked and it feels like they just hard counter me because they picked later than me in champ select. I much prefer things that are like soft counters where there's like some sort of like interaction or some kind of like outplay potential. You know, I do not like while I think Kassadin is a very strong champion in solo queue, I really hate his design, honestly, as like an anti-mage where just like if you counterpick, you have like just such a free time. So it's a very dangerous change to make, in my opinion, because it's like a champion where he already has like situations where he's very good. And it's taking those situations, making them even better, and also making the kind of weakness of Kassadin's game where like his pre-6 is quite weak and making it significantly stronger. He's got like 20 extra shield on every rank here, so that's like a big deal. Makes trading like a lot better, especially because you're going to be using Q so much, doesn't cost much mana. AP ratio, I think this is only on the shield. This doesn't make a big difference. I guess it helps in the mid game, but I feel like it doesn't have a big effect on the early game, and in the mid game, Kassadin's already kind of nuts, so in my opinion, it's not a big deal. Same thing down here, the base damage hasn't changed, but the AP ratio has gone up. I think most of the time Kassadin does overkill his opponents anyway, so not something that I think is a huge deal. I guess if you're getting an E like on the whole team, like AoE, it makes a difference, but overall I don't think it makes a huge difference. But I really think this Q change is very strong, and Kassadin will definitely be an S tier counter pick in solo queue, so I'm not looking forward to that. I might have to go back to banning him. Now, Mordekaiser. Mordekaiser is a champion that can be played mid lane, in my opinion. He's very good against a lot of the melee mid laners, so there's a couple of reasons for that. So one thing is that if you play mid, you don't need to take TP as Mordekaiser, whereas you probably do as top lane, which allows you to take something like Ignite, Ghost, or Exhaust. And if you're playing like one of these melee mids, so something like Zed, Qiyana, Yasuo, a lot of these champions really can't deal with a champion like Mordekaiser if they have a combat summoner. So that's like really good in mid lane, I think, already. And then like the bonus movement speed going from 3% at all levels with his passive all the way up to 9% at level 11. This is very nice. This helps you kind of like stick on opponents because there are some of the range champions that can kind of like cut you in circles or have like enough dashes and stuff. Like LeBlanc is an example where they can kind of just like keep going back and forth. But having the extra movement speed will help you close the gap. So I think it's a pretty big buff for both top and mid lane. But I think definitely I'll be looking to use him as a counter pick a bit more in mid lane. There's a few of these melee matchups that I think you can really cheese with Mordekaiser if you wanted. Next, some Poppy changes, so the cooldown a bit lower. This is pretty good. I think like a lot of the reason you pick Poppy is to counter these like dash comps. And if you're playing Poppy mid lane against like certain champions that just like spam dashes like Aurelia's or Yasuo's, having the lower W cooldown is pretty nice because the only opportunity your opponent really has to ever trade is when you are on cooldown with your W, and even then like you might just win the trade, right? So I think it's a very big deal. Again, it makes Poppy much better in those situations where she is good to be picked. So I think I've only played Poppy mid like maybe 3 times in my life, but I think I might have won all the games. So yeah, I actually quite like Poppy mid. I like Poppy in general as a counter pick to these like heavy dash comps. Now Poppies are charge knockup duration is 0.75 to 1 second. I think that's quite interesting. Definitely a lot of extra CC. Charged missile speed, I guess that makes it harder to dodge, harder to flash, but still probably quite good. Charged knockback distance, I think this is quite good. 2400 to 3400, this really means that if you knock someone out of the fight, there's like no chance they're getting back into it. Put on refund upon cancelled charge, 30 seconds to 15 seconds. That's pretty nice as well, because this meant that like 30 seconds was long enough that if you cancelled it, you probably wouldn't get to use it later in the fight. But now being 15 seconds, you can probably use it later in the fight. So honestly, I think these are pretty nice changes. I think Poppy, yeah, it's like a good counter pick, good champion in general, and this like makes her even better. I know people have played stuff like Poppy jungle, Poppy top as well. So yeah, I think Poppy's definitely in a good spot after this. So yeah, it could be a champion you consider playing. Sejuani passive frost armor timer now decreases with levels, so rather than 12 seconds, 12 to 6. To be honest, I'm not sure how big a difference this makes. Sejuani is not a champion that I've played or really know much about. I do feel like in the late game having lower frost armor is pretty big, because it means like even if you take poke in the late game, you can like re-engage shortly after and be really tanky. That being said, I am honestly just like not too sure. I don't play Sejuani, and I don't really know what like keeps her out of meta. Like it could be the jungle matchups, it could be just like the tank items. Honestly, guys, I don't really have much idea about this. I'm kind of gonna skip over it, but it does seem like it'd be quite good for the mid to late game overall. So Soraka's W heal AP ratio decreased. I think this is kind of nice. I think Soraka's one of those champions that's very, very annoying if she gets ahead, but very, very useless if she falls behind. So it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, I welcome the change. I don't really like playing against Soraka. I do think it would be better kind of to target her snowballing as opposed to just like, you know, like, I don't know, like making Soraka a bit more useful when she's behind and a bit less useful when she's ahead. I think it is somewhat the nature of these like healing champions, because it means like when you're ahead, like there's very few windows to chunk them down. And if the fight is close, like they're going to win. It's much harder to get shutdowns. But also if they're behind, like the damage is just so high that the healing doesn't really do anything for you. So yeah, I think it's like kind of a good nerf. Soraka's pretty annoying to verse. But I don't think it really like makes her that much weaker. I don't think she has like a ton of AP anyway, so I think she's still going to be quite strong in solo queue. Now, aura cooldown decreased for Sylas. I think this is a really weird change, because I think Sylas is already like really good. They've got Sylas has been a bit weak at all levels of plays, but I really don't agree. I think Sylas, pretty much his only real weakness is in the laning phase, and like in a lot of lanes, or especially as a counter pick, Sylas is already quite good. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised that they actually did change Sylas, but they've reduced his aura cooldown. I think this is very big. Sylas is a champion that does sort of want to use his ult on cooldown. He does like want to keep skirmishing. And like ultimate at max rank going from 40 to 30. Sometimes already you get to use your ult twice as Sylas late game, but now you might you almost definitely get to use it twice. So big change in my opinion. I think Sylas is already strong, didn't really need a buff, so I guess like maybe for competitive you needed a buff, but I'm not sure if ultimate cooldown really matters for competitive. I feel like you're always gonna have your ult, and I guess maybe it affects the level 16 team fights. So Tristana. I think Tristana is already a pretty good mid lane counter pick, and they've buffed her AD growth. So her AD at level 18 is like 7 higher. Yeah, I mean, I think Tristana is already pretty good as a counter pick to a lot of these either melee assassins that you can kind of destroy, especially a lot of the weaker laning ones. So like I think champions like Zed are maybe a bit harder, but against champions like Kassadin, Katarina, what are some other ones like Sylas? I think a lot of these ones you can really destroy as Tristana. There are also a lot of immobile mages that Tristana can do very well into, so stuff like Orianna. You can just jump on, they don't really have the CC to stop you. So I think Tristana as a mid laner is already quite good as an ADC as well. And so yeah, just welcome buffs overall. Now Vel'Koz Q and WAP ratios increased. In my opinion, this doesn't do much. I think that damage is not the thing that holds Vel'Koz back at all, and especially not like scaling damage. I think Vel'Koz's problem in mid lane is mainly to do with his matchups. I think a lot of the matchups are quite hard. If you play Vel'Koz bot, like either as an ADC or support, I think it's much, much easier, and I think like these are much nicer changes for him. So In my opinion, this doesn't make too big a difference, but I could be wrong, because I think, like, I don't know, it does increase his poke, right? Like, it is like a nice increase in damage, but I just don't think it's really damage that holds Vel'Koz back. So I'd like to see some kind of change, maybe to his E, where it's like faster or something, so he has some kind of response to these champions that jump on him in lane, because like realistically his E is so slow that it's like so easy to dodge. Either like if you throw it out on a mobile target, like a lot of the time they can just walk out of it before it hits them, and also like if a target jumps on you, it's so easy just to dodge with either a blink or you know, just simply walking out of it. So I'd like to see a Vel'Koz E change rather than damage, like increasing the missile speed or something. But yeah, I don't know, if you play Vel'Koz AD or support, it could make a difference. Now, Vladimir base armor decreased. This is a big change. This is another like change that I think is very dangerous. And the reason is that Vlad's like, against like ranged champions, Vlad's main weakness is against like their auto attacks, because like generally Vlad has enough sustain to kind of just like tank through all their spells, but with the low base armor will take a lot of auto attacks. And also because he has high cooldowns earlier, I believe his Q starts at 9 seconds, you will often get like punished with an auto attack when you go for CS. So while this is a change that they've said is mainly for top lane, I think this is very strong for mid as well. And I also think that Vlad is already quite a good counter to many of the AD mids, so champions like Yone and Yasuo, Vlad does much better into than other like more traditional mages. So I think that, yeah, and I don't know, I already think Vlad is like really, really strong. And while this, I guess, is a targeted buff for top lane, I think it does affect the mid lane matchups quite a lot as well. So yeah, like this, to me, like the Vlad and the Kassadin things, really, really strong. And yeah, I'm just like, I think they're going to be really OP probably. So Xayah looks like they're nerfing the lethality build, so they've got the Q, let's see, okay, Q base damage at later ranks, or okay, so down like 5 at the later ranks, or down more at the later ranks actually. Bonus AD remains the same, and the cooldown is a bit higher as well. I don't think this like just kills Xayah, but yeah, it's just like a little like nerf to the playstyle. I think one thing you could consider is if you were playing lethality Xayah mid, you could try playing one of the other ADC champions instead, so like Tristana mid or Lucian mid, something like that. But it doesn't look like the biggest nerf in the world, and I think it'll probably still be quite strong. So Xerath, E-stun duration increased. This is an interesting one. I don't think this really makes a huge difference. I'm trying to think, because I think when you hit your E as Xerath in lane, you pretty much always hit your Q and W. Like it's long enough that you can like combo it with your other spells. I guess maybe where it makes a difference is if people jump on you, it allows you to create like a little more distance, and it could also make a difference where if you hit someone in team fights with a stun, like it gives your teammates more time to follow up. So I guess, yeah, I think it's better than, say, the Vel'Koz change, but I don't know. Yeah, I kind of like it. I think it is like a fairly decent change. Maybe not the best change Xerath could have received, but I think Xerath already is a pretty decent champion. He's got like a lot of things that other champions don't have. Like he does have CC, he's got a lot of range, he has a strong laning phase, and also, unlike a lot of other mages, he has the ability to impact the map. Just like by walking down like halfway through the river and just like ulting bot lane or something. So I think Xerath already pretty decent champion. And yeah, I actually think it's a pretty good change. It does make some of those melee matchups a little bit easier, and it makes them a little bit stronger in team fights. So overall, yeah, pretty good change. Zoe Q and R mana cost decrease. So this is pretty nice. I think Zoe is definitely a champion that struggles with mana a lot. Because these are spells that you're definitely going to spam. So the mana cost on Portal Jump down, mana cost on Q down as well. Very nice. They've said it's like because like she doesn't synergize well with tier. I think that like doesn't really matter. In competitive, this isn't as much of a problem because you get a lot of blues and stuff. But I think for solo queue, like you don't get blues in mid game very often. And there are some times where if you spam your spells too much at the start of the fight, you'll kind of like run out of mana. So I think it's a pretty nice change. I think Zoe again already a strong champion, and this doesn't make a huge difference for her, but it I don't know, it just like makes it so if you do waste a couple of spells, it's like it's sort of not as punishing. Items. Being able to use Stopwatch. Okay, Stopwatch will no longer be purchasable if you already own Zhonya's or Guardian Angel. Okay, that's kind of interesting. I guess that's so you don't get the double Stopwatch. But from what I'm understanding, you can still... Oh, wait, I see. Because if you have a Stopwatch, it'll upgrade it. So yeah, this does stop the double Stopwatch thing. It does still mean that you can buy a Stopwatch, use it, and then you can buy a Zhonya's later. So yeah, that's kind of cool that they're getting rid of the double stopwatch interaction, but still keeping it so you can obviously use it on the way to building into it. So nice change, honestly. I think the double stopwatch and just having like 5 seconds of invulnerability or whatever it is pretty unhealthy. So yeah, I think that's it for all the kind of stuff. It actually ended up being a long video. How long was this? Like 30 minutes long. So from mid lane, which is obviously the thing I care about most, I'm like very interested to see a lot of these changes. I think the Swain changes will be very interesting to see. I think that Vlad, Tristana, Sylas, Mord, and Kassadin all got pretty big buffs, and I think a lot of these champions are pretty good already. So yeah, I think this is quite a cool patch because it makes a lot of those mid laners that are like either on the edge of being played or are already good but aren't great into being like just even better. So this will be kind of cool. I feel like the mid lane meta has been a bit stale for a while. I think it is like, it's a meta I enjoy a lot because I enjoy mage champions a lot. But this will be kind of cool to shake things up a little bit, get a few of those like more niche picks back in the limelight, and maybe we'll see some of these at MSI. So yeah, guys, if you have any questions about the changes, make sure to drop them below. Make sure to like and subscribe. And if you guys did like this sort of content, let me know, because I'm honestly not sure, because I feel like a lot of people already do this. And I'm looking at it, I think, in quite a narrow lens, like mainly from the mid lane perspective. But yeah, I don't know, guys. Like, just let me know if it's helpful, and I'll see you next time.